Hello wrestling fans. Welcome back to the $20 million Pro Wrestle Machine studio and welcome back to the show. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. July 28, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter, Raw no longer live every week. ECW lawsuit against WCW. Tons more. By Observer staff. The World Wrestling Federation confirmed last week the story mentioned in last week's Observer that starting in September they would no longer be taping Raw live every Monday night. In addition, the in-your-house concept has been dropped effective immediately and the WWF will go to monthly nearly 3-hour-long shows, all with a $29.95 price tag. The change will be effective with the September 7th pay-per-view from Louisville. The July 21st live Raw is War Show from Halifax, Nova Scotia, going unopposed since Nitro this week aired on July 22nd due to a TNT miniseries, drew a 4.1 rating and 6.1 share. The rating would be the highest for a Raw show in more than 1 year and among the company's biggest television audiences for any show in several years. The show drew a 3.8 in the first hour and grew to a 4.3 for the second hour, headlined by a Capture the Flag on a pole match with the Hart Foundation versus Steve Austin and Undertaker and Dude Love. While the rating may have been slightly higher than expected, the WWF was expected to do a monster rating because all of wrestling has been geared this year toward Monday nights and Raw was the only game in town this week. The figure represents 66 to 70% of the combined audience the two shows would receive on a typical Monday night. TNT can't be unhappy about the preemption because the Civil War miniseries drew a 4.1 rating as well, which is well above what Nitro does in that time slot. Nitro ratings weren't available as of deadline, but nobody believed, even unopposed, that the number would come close to the Raw rating because Tuesday isn't the night where 4+ million homes are patterned to watch wrestling at 8 p.m. The new television format, effective with September 8th, would consist of television tapings on alternate Mondays and Tuesdays. For example, the September 8th live Raw from Cincinnati, Ohio would be done exactly as in previous weeks with a shotgun taping for September 13th and a live Raw shoot. However, instead of taping on September 15th, that Raw show and the September 20th shotgun show would be taped on September 9th. Site hasn't been finalized for this show at press time, and it would continue that way with tapings on September 22nd and September 23rd. No taping on September 29th and tapings on October 6th and October 7th. Raw will be continuing in its 2-hour format, but moving back 1 hour from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. on the USA Network starting on August 4th. That's not the only format change in wrestling, as WCW will, to counter in some part the change in the Raw schedule, implement a semi-regular series of 3-hour Monday television shows called Nitro Plus, running from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Time. The current idea is that Nitro Plus shows would take place about once per month, with little warning in advance as to when they'll take place. The first Nitro Plus will take place on August 4th, which not coincidentally in the least, is the first week WWF's Raw moves back 1 hour. This plan to do shows like this was discussed before the shocking WWF rating came in for its taped SummerSlam special on July 14th, although no doubt that ratings sped the wheels into motion that much faster. The reason for the change in the WWF Live every Monday format was largely budgetary cost-cutting. WWF has been trying to cut back on expenses both in running live every week and also in transportation, which, depending upon where the taping is held, can run from $15,000 to $30,000 per week. Because the Tuesday shows would be booked in arenas within driving distance of the Monday shows, it would cut flight expenses for personnel not already on the tour doing house shows in half with the new format. There are numerous signs of late that the WWF is taking the financial situation very seriously. For example, for the July 21st show in Halifax, Nova Scotia, there were many regulars who were always brought to Raw tapings that weren't flown in as a cost-saving measure, and lots of regular wrestlers were featured instead in taped segments rather than brought in to do live new material. Those who were flown in, and I believe this includes Vince McMahon himself, were brought in on Saturday as opposed to Sunday to get the benefit of the cost savings of a Saturday stay-over flight. The Friday through Monday road schedule that the WWF has been following the past several months, since the move to live weekly 2-hour Raw tapings, has also been overhauled. There is no set guidelines as to how the schedule will be done. The feeling is that because of the time and expense of flying wrestlers to and from their homes, that it doesn't make sense either economically or for the stress level of the wrestlers themselves, to fly wrestlers home and back for just a 2-day break. So for the weeks where tapings will be on Mondays and Tuesdays, either they will add Wednesday and Thursday house shows making it a 10-day run, or they'll cancel Friday house shows and the wrestlers would have Wednesday through Friday off and return on Saturday and continue the tour with Mondays. There will be situations where WWF will be running a live house show on Monday night going head-to-head with its taped Raw show on USA. A lot of people will talk about these changes as like a throwing in the towel in the highly, and largely over-publicized Monday night ratings war, ironically coming during the same week when the group drew its best rating in more than 1 year. The change is in a sense an admission that it wasn't the fact that WCW was live every week and WWF wasn't as to why WCW was drawing significantly better ratings each week. WWF up until this past week didn't make a significant difference in the ratings being live every week, nor could it cut a significant amount into WCW's weekly margin of victory despite offering a largely better product than it had even a few months back and spending a lot more money to do so. As mentioned here many times in the past, when Raw was taped 3 out of every 4 weeks, there was no significant difference in the ratings of the live show as compared with that of the taped shows. Theoretically, because word travels faster in wrestling now than ever before, there will be more people than ever before aware of much of what will occur on the taped shows before they happen, but there is no evidence that anywhere close to enough people know, or if they do, it makes enough of a difference to have any kind of a measurable effect on the ratings. The WWF's decision to drop the 2-hour in-your-house concept of a reduced-price pay-per-view comes on the heels of WCW successfully running monthly nearly 3-hour-long pay-per-view shows this year at $27.95 and not showing any effects of the price tag cutting down on buys. Both groups for average shows seem to hover between 0.5 and 0.65 buy rate, but WCW this year is substantially ahead in pay-per-view revenue because of charging the higher price on every show. Now it will be back to WWF charging the higher price, as it had been up until the past year. To keep WrestleMania in its position as a special event, that show will be priced at $34.95. The 1995 WrestleMania, which was something of a major disappointment, was priced at $34.95, and there were many who blamed the price tag as the reason the show didn't come close to early projections. Obviously the WWF believed it as well, as it cut the Mania price back to $29.95 the past 2 years. However, there is every economic indication this year that the wrestling audience is far more willing to spend more money to see what they perceive as a premium event, and all forms of entertainment are charging more for tickets than a few years ago. In a sense, this would remove the specialness of the other 4 of the formerly Big 5 shows of the year: Rumble, King of the Ring, SummerSlam and Survivors, since all the shows would have to be marketed more as equals to the other monthly events. However, WCW has been running this year under similar circumstances while passing WWF as the industry pay-per-view leader. While the future of UFC-type events for 1998 doesn't look positive, one would expect added competition from at least 3 ECW events on pay-per-view and several WCW-sponsored Lucha Libre events. In fact, within wrestling there is now the theory that up to a certain point, not only is price inelastic in wrestling, but that higher ticket prices may actually encourage buys. Zane Bresloff, who promotes most of the house shows for WCW, which has recently increased its prices across the board to a significant degree and at the same time has shown a significant increase in attendance while doing so, June was the single biggest month for arena attendance in the history of the company, has noted that particularly in the major markets, selling tickets at $35 is easy and they are generally snatched up the first day. But it's very difficult to sell tickets at $10 or $12. He believes there is a psychological deal where people will take dates or go out with buddies for high-priced tickets but won't do so when tickets are cheap because somehow they see that as a sign of seeing a minor league-level entertainment product or being part of the peanut gallery. A similar but opposite situation that gives the same message in wrestling took place in 1992 when Kip Frey was in charge of WCW. To make himself fan-friendly, one of his first moves was to decrease prices at the arena shows. The end result of that was an actual decrease in live attendance, not an increase. It must be noted that pro wrestling, when it comes to drawing mainstream fans, is in competition with other sports and entertainment events, and for all the talk that $35 is too much for a family of 4 to buy tickets, the fact is the tickets are still far cheaper than events like pro football, the NHL, the NBA and other major league sports events that routinely sell out their shows in most markets. ECW was expected to have filed a federal lawsuit early this week against WCW regarding a number of issues including Scott Levy, Raven, and Michael Mena, Steve Richards, appearing at the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view show on July 13 in Daytona Beach, Florida. Steve Carl, who was handling the legal situation for ECW, wouldn't comment on legal affairs or if the suit itself had been filed at press time, but did say that ECW considers the actions of both men having violated the terms of their agreements with ECW. Paul Heyman had said over the weekend, and ECW had reported on its hotline, a lawsuit would be filed in federal court in the Southern District of New York for contract tampering, tortious interference with contracted personnel, and violation of the company's intellectual property, although we have no confirmation such a lawsuit had been filed as of press time. Heyman claimed he sent copies of Levy's contract agreement for the April 13 barely legal pay-per-view, which included a 6-month non-compete clause in regards to appearing on a rival wrestling pay-per-view show to Eric Bischoff, but Bischoff, or Nick Lambros, or whomever in WCW made the actual call, still put the Raven and Richards segment on the show. For whatever reason, WCW has been very careful when it comes to waiting out contracted periods before debuting WWF talent such as Kevin Nash, Scott Hall and Kurt Hennig, but wasn't in this case, which may or may not be based on company lawyers' interpretation of the solidness of the ECW non-compete clause. Heyman said that ECW had threatened legal action against WCW if they were to use Levy on the pay-per-view show, and there had been talks in the past between Heyman and Bischoff regarding a contract buyout where WCW would pay ECW for the rights to use Raven immediately on pay-per-view. However, WCW refused the deal. Heyman also claims WCW tampered with ECW contracted personnel by using Levy as an intermediary and trying to get James Fullington, Sandman, in WCW, and is also claiming WCW has slandered ECW on its hotline. The contractual situation with Richards is another of those disputed situations. Heyman claims Mana, Richards, signed to A on May 10 an intention to sign a contract as opposed to an intention to negotiate deal with ECW, and thus was legally under an agreement with ECW at the time he was negotiating with WCW. Mana had admitted to signing a document of that type but claimed its time period for the document had already run out, and since he didn't sign an actual contract, they had no legal obligation to ECW. Heyman claims Mana was still under the agreement but that he released him from the agreement due to him claiming that due to a broken neck, Mana was concerned he'd be unable to wrestle the ECW style, although there was heat in that Heyman wasn't aware of Richards appearing on Nitro on July 7 until the day of the show. Actually, when it comes to this case, whatever deal Mana was or wasn't under is a moot point, since ECW isn't claiming him as being a contracted performer when it comes to his appearing on either Nitro or the pay-per-view show, but is claiming the intellectual rights to the characterization of Stevie Richards and not contractual rights to the person of Michael Mana. ECW's claim is that both Raven and Richards, the characters as opposed to the individuals, and how they are being portrayed, is the intellectual property of ECW, and by WCW using them in their former ECW roles, it's a violation of copyright and trademark. There have been legal precedents in wrestling in regard to similar situations. For example, WCW, after legal threats, changed the entire name and character of Ray Traylor from the Boss, doing a gimmick very similar to the Big Boss Man character in WWF, to the Guardian Angel because WWF claimed the nightstick, police uniform, etc. as their intellectual property. However, numerous other wrestlers and characters have gone from company to company without changing names and or gimmicks, but the basic premise is that to maintain a stage name or gimmicks such as Randy Macho Man Savage, one must have established the name and character before joining the company rather than it be a gimmick established within the company. Generally speaking, both companies have allowed wrestlers to use their gimmick names when working independents after leaving the organization, but the problems surface when trying to use those gimmicks with a rival major promotion. Levy had claimed when establishing the Raven character, which was his idea, that he maintained the rights to the character. The on-again, off-again shoot match between Rickson Gracie and Nobuhiko Takada is back on again for October 11 at the Tokyo Dome, but not without a lot of questions still to be answered and a lot of skepticism whether this version of the show will take place. The event, first proposed for June, then pushed back to August, then cancelled due to Nippon Television pulling out of the deal, which took away between $250,000 and $500,000 from the show's budget, and left them without major television coverage or promotion of the event. Nippon TV was apparently concerned that a true shoot match could easily wind up lasting only 1 minute, or turn into a long defensive struggle which would make for boring television, so the risk of viewer dissatisfaction was relatively high. However, according to press reports late last week, Tokyo's Channel 12 this past week agreed to broadcast the show live and pay the rights fees, and the match was announced after Takada signed the contract on July 17. Gracie arrived in Japan on July 19 for a July 22 Tokyo press conference to formally announce the match. However, at that press conference it was instead announced that Perfect TV, a home satellite outfit in its infancy in Japan similar to DirecTV in the United States, would be broadcasting the match. What was also strange at the press conference is that the promotional company, a new group called Kakatuji Revolution Spirits, KRS for short, didn't announce when tickets would go on sale or ticket prices, which is usually what these press conferences are held for, to either kick off ticket sales or to announce a date they go on sale. The company didn't even announce where it would be setting up its office and its phone number or fax number or any contact people for further information. Later, when reporters called the Tokyo Dome, they were told that the building wasn't even booked for October 11th. The company that was originally planning this promotion, H20 Promotions out of Nagoya, which had also never promoted anything at this level, had dropped out of the show due to an inability to finance such an undertaking. It was announced at the press conference that Gracie would be receiving $935,000 for the match, a figure which is likely more than any NHB fighter has ever earned in the ring during their entire lifetime, let alone for one match, while Takada would be receiving $187,000. The money figure for Takada was roughly the same as he received from New Japan for his 3 Tokyo Dome record-setting houses against Keiji Muto twice and Shinya Hashimoto once in 1985 to 1986. In the original deal, Gracie was promised a $600,000 guarantee and a percentage of the house which, with a sellout, could earn him in the $900,000 range in total, which is believed to be the second largest payoff ever for an event of this type. Muhammad Ali was offered $6 million for a 1976 mixed match with Antonio Inoki, but actually received closer to $1.8 million when all was said and done. The highest payoff we are aware of for a single pro wrestling event besides for Ali would be the $750,000 that Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant received for their 1987 WrestleMania match, and a figure believed to be about $750,000 that Dennis Rodman received for Bash at the Beach on July 13. But are believed to be the largest purses within the NHB genre are the $150,000 first prizes won by Dan Severn and Don Fry respectively in winning the Ultimate tournaments. The match will be fought with a maximum of 12 5-minute rounds within a boxing ring as opposed to an octagon, with a 2-minute rest period between rounds. If the match goes the time limit, the match will be declared a draw rather than having a judge's decision. If both fighters agree to it after the 12 rounds are over, the match can continue indefinitely under sudden death rules. The match can end with a tap out or by stoppage by the referee or the doctor, or with the corner throwing in the towel. There will be no rope escapes or breaks if caught in a submission hold, and grabbing the ropes is illegal. There will be no kicking with shoes, so Takada would likely fight barefooted. Both are mandated by the rules to wearing light grappling gloves. They have the option to wear elbow or knee pads, and elbows are legal except to the spine. There will be no kicking of an opponent who is down. Head-butting is illegal. And there are no attacks to the groin, spine, hair, or eyes allowed. The ring will have 4 ropes like boxing instead of 3 like pro wrestling. There will be 6 other matches on the show, with no hints as to whether they will be worked or shoot matches. The only names announced thus far appearing on the show are Koji Kiao and Yoji Anjo, 2 named Japanese pro wrestlers who have done shooting matches in the past, although Kiao is 0-2 and Anjo is 0-1 in Vale Tudo competition. Rumor has it that Kiao's foe would be Ricardo Moraes, and that Brazilian's Roberto Traven, who was a tournament in Russia recently, and Fabio Gurgel would be on the show, which gives credence to the idea it would be an all-shoot show. In the past, Gracie had insisted on not only not doing a worked match, but not even agreeing to a time frame, such as agreeing to carry his opponent for 1 round before going for a victory in the second round, plus had insisted he wouldn't appear on a show where any matches were worked because he didn't want anyone questioning the credibility of his match. His younger brother Hoist turned down a reported $1 million deal for New Japan Pro Wrestling to do a job for Antonio Inoki in a match that would have taken place in October of 1996 at the Tokyo Dome and resulted in the entire show having to be scrapped. Originally, the belief was Gracie versus Takada would be able to sell out the Tokyo Dome as the most hype shoot, as opposed to work shoot, match in the history of Japanese pro wrestling, but fan anticipation has likely been soured by the previous postponement and cancellation, plus the fact that the interest level in pure shooting has decreased in Japan, and well as the United States. However, one would think from a financial standpoint this would be the biggest money NHB match in history, which again shows the value of fake hype over reality production. Gracie, reputed in many circles to be the greatest fighter in the world, has not had that reputation truly tested in many years. Now 38, the 185-pound son of fighting legend Helio Gracie and older brother of Hoist Gracie, won 2 Vale Tudo tournaments in Japan, but neither of those tournaments contained any big-name fighters other than Gerard Gordeau in the second tournament, who actually lost in the first round, and even though he was a stand-up fighting legend, had very limited ground skill. With major NHB shows taking place in the US, Japan, Brazil, Europe, Russia, and Australia, he chose to sit them out and never answered challenges issued by various winners of major tournaments such as Dan Severn, Ken Shamrock or Mark Coleman, and instead waited for someone to meet a nearly seven-figure price tag. It was apparently a wise business strategy because his time came. Gracie is reputed to be undefeated in 400 matches, and although that figure is clearly an exaggeration, he has never been beaten, and in his day in Brazil was considered as the best fighter in the world and did tap out Olympic gold medal winning wrestler Mark Schultz twice. At the same time, in his last competitive situation more than 2 years ago in a Japanese tournament at Budokan Hall, he had a first-round match against Japanese pro wrestler Yoshihisa Yamamoto, and he looked very much human as opposed to mythical in taking about 21 minutes to beat Yamamoto, who has had a few shoot matches since that time in rings that he has lost in a much faster and more one-sided contest to fighters like Ricardo Moraes with far lesser reputations and skill level. Takada is one of the greatest pure athletes and workers of this generation in pro wrestling and had the reputation of being a strong shooter in the dojo, and has excellent demonstration kickboxing skills as opposed to battle-tested kickboxing skills. But the fact is he's still a pro wrestler who has never had a legitimate contest against a top-level fighter in his life, not to mention that he's 35 years old and past his athletic prime. It has to be considered an incredible long shot that he'd be able to survive for any length of time against someone with so much experience in this form of fighting, even given the fact he'll have a 25 to 30 pound size advantage, is well trained in both standing and ground fighting, and is a few years younger. Coming on the heels of this is the announcement by K1 promoter Kazuyoshi Ishii that he would be attempting to sign Royce Gracie to his first competitive match since 1995 on his November 9th show at the same Tokyo Dome. Gracie, who won 3 of the first 4 UFC tournaments before bowing out after being hammered by Ken Shamrock in a 36-minute draw in the first UFC super fight, has never fought previously in Japan. Since we did a business analysis of the first 3 months of the year in pro wrestling in the May 5th issue and not all that much has changed in regard to momentum or direction, we are just going to offer these figures comparing the first 6 months of 1997 with similar periods in 1995 and 1996 for both WWF and WCW. The major thing to notice in this table when it comes to why budgets are being tightened is that even though WWF's arena attendance average has increased this year, it doesn't make up for the drop of nearly $600,000 per month when it comes to pay-per-view revenue as compared to 1 year ago. Another note when it comes to average is that this year the WWF has been running 15 to 18 house shows per month as compared to 22 the previous year, so once again while average is up, total revenue would be down even in that category. WCW, which has been the leader when it comes to television ratings on and off for much of the past decade, although it was closer and there were several years like 1995 where the WWF did beat WCW overall when it came to ratings, has almost caught up this year in attendance. The gate differential is largely because it took WCW until well into this year when it raised its ticket prices to basically the same structure, and now in many markets a higher structure than WWF. WCW has a substantial lead in ratings, and has taken the lead in pay-per-view although the gap is still relatively small. WCW, on the other hand, had greatly increased its arena revenue to the point of nearly doubling its average income per show. In some instances, due to playing in larger and more costly buildings this year as opposed to last and spending more on advertising, I don't think the actual profit margin would have doubled, but it would be a very safe bet to say it's increased dramatically, while at the same time they are up over last year in pay-per-view as well, while TV ratings have only shown a slight decline over the same period last year. One thing it should be noted when it comes to TV ratings and myth versus reality, is that the NWO angle is constantly being touted as the reason the ratings are up and that WCW is beating WWF. One has to say the NWO angle is very likely a main cause for the increases at the house shows, certainly in merchandising and buy rates, but the fact of the matter is the ratings over the first 6 months of 1996 before the NWO came into existence, and for the most part only including 1 month of Scott Hall and maybe a week or 2 of Kevin Nash, were higher than the first 6 months of this year. Why do I think I'll be reading next week somewhere how if it wasn't for the NWO that WCW's TV ratings would be in the toilet? Another interesting note from the WCW comparisons is that even though buy rates are up significantly from last year, if you compare them with the same period in 1995, before Nitro, before WCW became hot and without using football and basketball superstars on every pay-per-view, they are actually lower, and pay-per-view is still the leading revenue source for a Major League American pro wrestling company nowadays. Japanese television rundown. July 5th, New Japan. 1. Koji Kanemoto and Shinjiro Otani beat Jushin Liger and Norio Onaga in 13:56. This was the typical fast-paced match with a lot of hot moves that you'd expect, building to all the false finishes. The finish itself was flat since Otani did his springboard spin kick but missed with the first foot, although did hit with the second, and then didn't hold the bridge on German suplex well. 3.5 stars. 2. Akitoshi Saito pinned Tatsuhito Takaiwa when Takaiwa ran into a kick and was pinned in 10:29. The final 3:30 aired. Takaiwa looked good but Saito didn't look good. 3. Tatsumi Fujinami and Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi beat Tatsutoshi Goto and Michiyoshi Ohara and Kunyaki Kobayashi in 10:40 when Fujinami pinned Ohara after a Billy Robinson backbreaker followed by a Dragon Sleeper. The final 3:30 aired. What aired was decent. 4. NWO Sting and Hiro Saito beat Kensuke Sasaki and Takashi Iizuka in 11:19 when Sting pinned Iizuka after a Scorpion Death Drop. Reverse DDT. Bad match with no heat. 1/4 star. 5. Masahiro Chono and Great Muta and Hiroyoshi Tenzan beat Shinya Hashimoto and Tadao Yasuda and Junji Hirata in 8:05 when Muta pinned Yasuda after a chop coming off the top rope. Another bad match. After the match, Muta kept screaming "Fuck New Japan" and painted NWO on several photographers' white shirts and on the camera lens. 1/2 star. July 12, New Japan. 1. Riki Choshu and Fujinami beat Goto and Akira Nagami in 6:55 when Choshu pinned Nagami after a lariat. This was one of Choshu's final matches and boy was it not memorable. Nothing really happened aside from a huge Choshu chant after the finish. 1/4 star. 2. Liger and El Samurai beat Kobayashi and Nagami in 10:58 when Liger pinned Kobayashi with La Magistral. Liger carried the entire match since even Samurai didn't look good here. It picked up toward the finish when Liger used the Fisherman Suplex on Kobayashi, which is the move Kobayashi popularized in Japan in the early 80s long before it became the perfect plex in the US. Kobayashi used the move back for a near fall right before the finish. 2.25 stars. 3. Kanemoto pinned Takaiwa in 18:55. Only the final 5 minutes aired on television, but it was very good with them trading big moves and near falls. At one point Takaiwa did 4 power bombs in a row on one move, and followed with a Splash Mountain, outsider's edge into another power bomb, but Kanemoto kicked out. Kanemoto finally won with a power slam off the top rope. 3.5 stars. 4. Hashimoto and Hirata beat Sasaki and Kazuyuki Fujita in 13:53. The story of the match was this was the highest profile match for rookie Fujita, who was a national champion amateur before starting with New Japan earlier in the year. He's got a great athletic look and already shows good fire, but is tentative and reminiscent of a lot of amateur wrestlers in the way they move as rookies. He got a big pop for kicking out of Hirata's headbutt off the top rope, but Hirata got the pin with his own unique hold, an arm lock into a bridging suplex called a machine suplex. 2.25 stars. 5. Muta and Tenzan and NWO Sting beat Fujinami and Nakanishi and Kojima in 13:22. At one point Nakanishi got Tenzan in the torture rack, but Muta broke it up by hitting him with Sting's baseball bat right in front of the ref. It's really weird in an athletic style promotion like New Japan to do something like that and have the ref see it and not do anything. Muta was the entire match doing all his signature moves. Finish saw Nakanishi get Muta in a neck hanging tree, but Muta blew mist in his eyes. He then blew mist in Kojima's eyes and pinned him after a facebuster. 2.25 stars. Mexico. Don't have much in the way of news with XCQ no longer on the satellite. The current Galavision television schedule is EMLL for 2 hours every Saturday, 5 p.m. Pacific Time, 8 p.m. Eastern, and AAA for 90 minutes every Monday night, 8:30 p.m. Pacific, 11:30 p.m. Eastern. With most of the top stars in WCW this week, the July 25th promo Azteca television taping will be headlined by Vampiro and Mascara Sagrada and Super Parka vs. Los Hermanos Dinamita and Nigma defending the Mexican welterweight title against Torero. Expect in future weeks the following different feuds to begin being pushed on Azteca television: Jerry Estrada vs. Tarzan Boy, Gitano vs. Juventud Guerrera, Hector Garza vs. Dandy, Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Psicosis, and Lizmark Jr. vs. Black Warrior. All Japan. The cover story in both magazines this week was Jinsei Shinzaki, Hakushi, debuting with this group on the July 25th Budokan Hall show. Shinzaki and Johnny Smith will face Hiroshi Hase and Jun Akiyama. Hase and Akiyama have similar backgrounds in that they were both graduates of Senshu College and were stars on the wrestling team. Hase's comment about the lineup change with Shinzaki taking Monokia Mossman's spot in the match were interesting, as he said that if Shinzaki was a poor wrestler, he wouldn't want to wrestle him, but since he's a so-so wrestler, the change was okay. Shinzaki came to the All Japan House show on July 17 in Saijo before the card, as Baba was sitting in his normal spot before shows behind the concession stand table signing autographs. Shinzaki prayed before him with Baba acting like he didn't understand what he was doing. Yoshihiro Takayama of the Kingdom Promotion worked shows on July 20th and July 21st leading to the July 25th Budokan Hall show. Takayama is part of the group that includes Steve Williams and Gary Albright in lacrosse, with the connection being Albright and Takayama both were with the same old UWFI promotion a few years ago. On July 20th in Yamato, Takayama and Albright in lacrosse beat Masao Inoue and Tamon Honda and Toshiaki Kawada, while the next night in Kawagoe saw Takayama and Albright in Williams over Kawada and Akira Tao and Masao Inoue in the main event when Albright pinned Kawada clean after a German suplex. They're grooming Takayama for Kawada since the two had a memorable match last September on a UWFI baseball stadium show and were foes in a tag team title match at an All Japan Budokan Hall show earlier in the year. After July 25th, All Japan will be off until August 17th for a tour that lasts until a September 6th Budokan Hall show. July 13th TV show did a 3.3 rating. New Japan. The only match added to the August 10th Nagoya Dome show this week was a tag team title match with Satoshi Kojima and Manabu Nakanishi defending against Kazuo Yamazaki and Kensuke Sasaki. It was also announced that Antonio Inoki would be the referee of the Great Muta vs. Naoya Ogawa match. Not much else of major significance with no shows this week. Masahiro Chono suffered what is being reported as a broken ankle during the Universal tapings in Orlando, Florida in a match against Dusty Wolf when he delivered an atomic drop, but the ankle went out because the knee was out of position. Even with the injury, Chono has made it clear he's going to work both the G1 tournament starting on August 1st and the Nagoya Dome show. Earlier in the week, Chono asked that if both he and Shinya Hashimoto win their first-round matches in the G1 tournament on August 1st, that their second-round match against each other on August 2nd be made an IWGP heavyweight title match. Chono vs. Hashimoto for the title is scheduled for the Nagoya Dome 8 days later, but Chono said that since Hashimoto was born in Gifu, a city near Nagoya, and is something of a local hero, that he wanted to go into Nagoya having the belt rather than challenging for the belt. This hasn't been made official, but it's doubtful that an angle like this would be brought up if it wasn't going to followed up on. Other Japan notes. K1 ran the biggest show in its short history on July 20th at the Nagoya Dome, drawing 36,500 fans paying $3.75 million. We've got complete results in the results section, but the main event saw K1's biggest star, Andy Ho from Switzerland, lost in just over 2 minutes of the first round to a one-punch knockout by Francisco Filho of Brazil, the 1997 Kyokushinkai World Champion. Filho, 26, who naturally became an immediate superstar in Japan, had been training the past 6 months in Seattle with Maurice Smith for his K1 debut. K1 will be running its annual Grand Prix tournament with matches beginning on September 7th at the Osaka Dome and climaxing on November 9th at the Tokyo Dome. It's amazing how important the year 1993 was in the grand scheme of things, as that year K1, UFC, ECW, Michinoku Pro and Pancrase all debuted, all in their own way changing the face of the industry. Great Sasuke ran what was billed as his farewell show on July 19th in Hachinahe, pinning Tiger Mask before 578 fans. Michinoku Pro has really gone down, with Shiryu having quit and now in Mexico, Taka Michinoku in Mexico, and if he hasn't done so already, certainly being a strong possibility to sign with the WWF, Jinsei Shinzaki on tour with FMW and working for All Japan, although he hasn't completely quit this office, and Super Delphin having quit as well, which explains that strange situation in his singles match a few weeks back where he wouldn't wrestle Dick Togo. Sasuke announced the company's biggest show of the year on October 10th at Tokyo Sumo Hall, headlined by Undertaker vs. Shinzaki, and that 3 other WWF headliners would work the show. The situation with Sasuke and WWF seems quite uncertain. At a press conference this week, Sasuke acted mad at the WWF for flying him in with an economy class ticket from Japan, giving the idea that WWF didn't respect the level of stardom he's achieved in the industry. They also took it as an insult that when they flew Michinoku in from Mexico, who in the pecking order is below him, they flew him in first class, although others are saying that Sasuke was actually paid more for the matches than Michinoku since he's the bigger star on a worldwide basis. There is tremendous pressure with all the guys leaving, and his company theoretically having to run all these shows if he weren't to be on them because he's in the US instead. This also may be posturing to get WWF to up their deal with him. Pancrase ran its annual Neo Blood, for the younger wrestlers, tournament with afternoon and evening shows on July 20th at Korakuen Hall, both drawing sellouts of 2,250. Keiichiro Yamamiya won the tournament beating Satoshi Hasegawa in the finals. The main event on the evening show was scheduled as a match to determine the next challenger for the King of Pancrase title in September between Minoru Suzuki and Jason DeLucia. It was announced that day that Suzuki had just blown out his knee in training for the match and needed reconstructive surgery and would be out of action for the rest of the year, so DeLucia won the match via forfeit. They did offer refunds, which is rare in Japan because generally they get the word out in the press well ahead of time about a main event substitution, but apparently this injury really was at the last minute. There were a lot of changes in the original lineup since the Boss Rutan vs. Guy Mesger match was cancelled when Mesger couldn't participate from an announced injury suffered in an auto accident a few weeks back. Probably the biggest upset of the year in Pancrase took place on the evening show when Jason Godse upset COP champion Yuki Kondo in a non-title match with a forearm choke in 8:17. The main event on the afternoon show was for the number one contendership for the title. Why they would have a match for the number one contendership and a totally different match the same day for the next title shot is one of those things that don't make much sense, where Masakatsu Funaki kept his spot, using a guillotine choke on Asami Shibuya. Rings ran July 22nd at Osaka Furitsu Gym before 4,500 with the surprise result of Kiyoshi Tamura beating Bitsaid Teriel in the main event. It was interesting to see Tamura and not Akira Maeda put in the main event, particularly when Maeda was facing well-known Hansen Nyman. While Tamura is a much bigger star than Teriel, this group always keeps Teriel strong, and the size difference between the two is immense, as Teriel is 6'6.5" and 310 pounds and Tamura is about 5'8" and 190 pounds. Jerry Bolander, scheduled to make his pro wrestling debut on this show, cancelled at the last minute, and we don't have word as to what happened. The multi-promotional Women's Junior All-Star Show took place on July 19th at Yokohama Bunka Gym before 4,000 fans. Younger wrestlers from all the different offices that have women wrestlers participated as a way to give newcomers main event exposure on a big show. In the top matches, Meiko Satomura and Sonoko Kato of GIA retained their odd junior tag team titles, beating Tomoko Miyaguchi of JWP and Saya Endo of AJW. Yoshiko Tamura of AJW won the WCW Women's Cruiserweight, remember that belt? Title from Toshie Uematsu in 2009, while Momoe Nakanishi of AJW retained her All Japan Junior title, beating Sumi Sake of JD. Although the August 20th Budokan Hall show is being billed as Asia Khan's memorial retirement from AJW show, she will actually work 4 more dates after that, with her final match being on October 18th in Takamatsu before wrestling one last year as a free agent. Her opponent on August 20th will be Manami Toyota, and also announced for that show besides the Kyoko Inoue vs Yumiko Hata WWWA title match is a tag title match with Atsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda defending against Tomoko Watanabe and Kumiko Makawa. AJW runs August 22nd in Osaka with Kaoru Ito vs Watanabe for the vacant All-Pacific title as the only match announced. The title is vacant since Takako Inoue will be out of action likely for the rest of the year, needing surgery on her face after breaking her orbital bone. Fuyuki Gun Promotions on July 21st in Hakata may have promoted a first in Japan. The main event was a 6-man tag with Geto and Jado and Hiromichi Fuyuki going against the Headhunters and FMW woman wrestler Shark Tsuchiya. Tsuchiya pinned Fuyuki with an inside cradle to win the match, which I believe would be the first time a woman has ever pinned a male star in a Japanese match. This set up Fuyuki's show on July 22nd in Nagasaki, where he faced former Crush Gal Linus Asuka in a singles match. Asuka started with a low blow, and then Super Leather, Mike Kirchner, came out with his chainsaw and cut up Fuyuki's head. Asuka did one finisher after another on Fuyuki, getting near falls using moves like a moonsault, 2 power bombs, a headbutt off the top rope, a superplex and a Wakigatami submission before a ref bump. Geto and Jado interfered and they did a triple power bomb on Asuka, and Fuyuki scored the pin. It was announced that Asuka and Tsuchiya would team with LLPW's Eagle Sawai in the August 5th Sapporo tournament, with the rest being men's teams for the FMW World Street Fight 6-man tag title. War will be running its next tour from July 25th to August 6th with Abdullah the Butcher and Lance Storm as the foreigners. War will be holding a tournament later this year to create its first heavyweight champion. Toshio Yamada's debut as a regular for the GIA promotion was on July 21st at Korakuen Hall before a sellout 1,800 fans. Yamada beat Kaoru in what was billed as a UFC rules match. No idea if that constituted a shoot or a match worked to look like a shoot, but I'm guessing the latter since Kaoru lost after 5 rope breaks of submissions. Akira Hokuto worked that show both under her ring name and under a mask in the main event as Reina Jubuki. They started a feud with Jubuki and Sugar Sato. Mr. Wrestling No Idea Who, Charlie Norris, Sam Houston and One Man Gang are touring this week for Yoshiaki Yatsu's Social Pro Wrestling Federation. Shinzaki worked the FMW's July 19th show in Osaka in the main event, teaming with Hayabusa and Koji Nakagawa to lose to the Gladiator and Hisakatsu Oya and Mr. Ganasuke. JWP ran a weird angle on July 18th at Korakuen Hall which drew 1,900 fans. The main event was Devil Masami and Tomoko Kuzumi vs Hikari Fukuoka and Miyaguchi. Fukuoka had Masami pinned and the ref counted 2 and then held up his count, as if he thought Masami was supposed to kick out, but she didn't since it was only 9 minutes into the match and JWP Korakuen main events usually last about 20 minutes. Masami started screaming on the house mic that she was pinned and she lost the match and walked out of the ring. Fans were chanting "Devil, Devil" for 10 minutes to get back in the ring, but she never came back. The JWP president got in the ring with tears in his eyes, saying the only thing he can come up with is to restart the match as a handicap match with Kuzumi going against both, which Kuzumi ended up losing. Masami has since worked all the JWP house shows since that time, so it isn't like she walked out of the promotion or anything. Kiyoshi Tamura has opened up his own martial arts gym which isn't affiliated with the Rings promotion. Jushin Liger will be working the July 27th Wrestle Dream Factory show in Oda facing Masayoshi Motegi. USWA. It was a pretty quiet week on the heels of the show with the ECW talent on July 13th, which drew 1,200 fans and $6,000, which would be the best USWA house in a long time. Just as an example of how bad business has been, there are weeks where the total gross for the entire week hasn't hit $6,000. The actual name of the new president of the USWA is Mike Selker, and he's setting up an office in Memphis shortly. There is still no word of either a return date with ECW in another city, or another house show in Memphis. Luther Biggs is gone, announced at various times in various places as having been arrested or having suffered a broken leg, and Dutch Mantle will now be managing Billy Travis. They did a TV angle where Doomsday, Glenn Jacobs, was to wrestle 3 jobbers. As it turned out, the Scorpion turned out to be Spellbinder under the hood, and so they did the La Parka / Diamond Dallas Page angle. Well, at least they are copying the good angles. By the way, it doesn't appear that Jacobs will wind up being Kane in WWF, as USWA hasn't been told of any date in the near future that he'd have to wind up his stay here. Later in the show, Brian Christopher was attacked by Travis and Doomsday until Doug Gilbert made the save. Gilbert's return, he had already returned earlier in the week at a house show in Louisville, got a big pop. There was actually tremendous heat in the past between Gilbert and Jerry Lawler. Later Gilbert was jumped by both and Christopher made the save, which led to a tag match on television which ended in a heels DQ when Mantle interfered. Here and there. Phil Mushnick of the New York Post and TV Guide fame ran a short in the Post in his July 14th column taken from that week's Observer noting Gary Wolfe, Doug Gilbert, Tommy Rich, Steve Williams, Anthony Durante, Leon Vader White, Alex Rizzo and Billy Travis as pro wrestlers who have been arrested this year on drug charges, mostly steroids. That isn't entirely correct, as it was meant as a list of pro wrestlers that have been arrested this year. Neither White nor Travis were arrested on drug charges. White's situations in Kuwait were well documented and Travis was on failure to pay child support and alimony, and Rizzo was a probation violation regarding charges from many years back. Rich and Gilbert were arrested for allegedly leaving an indie show before the card started after collecting their money ahead of time, but when caught, there was marijuana found in the car, so both had that added to their charges. The only ones linked with steroids were Wolfe and Durante. Steve Nelson's next USWF show will be August 16th with 20 matches including Dan Severn vs. Paul Buntello, Paul Jones vs. Tony Castillo, and a match to create a USWF Women's Champion with Danya Bieria vs. Lisa Hunt. I was at an all-pro wrestling show on July 18th in Hayward, California for a Falls Count Anywhere match with Vic Grimes vs. Aaron O'Grady, since I was kind of told ahead of time something would happen that I should see. Well, the match largely took place outside the gym with the guys brawling up and down the street and the parking lot, bashing each other on trees and cars and knocking over signs, along with liberal usage of garbage cans, a shovel and a rake. There was a Hurricane Rana off a car in the parking lot. Shades of Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Juventud Guerrera in Philadelphia. Anyway, the 6th spot this is building to is O'Grady got in a car and was going about 30 miles per hour, I'd estimate, more likely a little faster than a little slower, with the driver's door open, and ran over Grimes with the door as he drove by him. Oh yeah, and within 30 seconds Grimes had kicked out of a pin attempt on the asphalt and was back up and on a fence, and ended up winning the match a few minutes later back in the ring. He appeared to be unhurt by the stunt, but I fear for those who try and copycat it, since everything that gets attention in wrestling is eventually copied. Also want to make mention of Robert Thompson, a local second-generation wrestler who is a good enough worker to go somewhere. His wrestling base and move-to-move transitions are solid, and his high-flying ranges from good to exceptional, complete with his having a moonsault off the top rope to the floor in his regular arsenal. Former WWF announcer Sean Mooney is now working as a news anchor on WBZ, the CBS affiliate in Boston. Tony Rumble's local public access cable television show in Massachusetts dedicated this past weekend's show to the memory of Bruiser Brody. It almost seems like another lifetime ago with how fast things change in this industry, but it was 9 years ago this week that Brody was murdered in Puerto Rico. The WWC never went out of business, although their business hit the skids in the wave of the bad publicity stemming from the incident and never fully recovered. Jose Gonzalez as Invader number 1 was not only brought back to the company, but has been pushed as the number 2 babyface in the promotion for probably 8 of the past 9 years. Ian Rodden's IWA on July 19 drew a sellout 400 in Louisville, Kentucky after drawing 300 fans in the same building the night before. They did an angle where Rodden announced that Leigh Thatcher would be the new IWA commissioner, and that the IWA was joining the NWA. They brought out Dennis Coralluzzo as the head of the NWA, who then cut a heel promo to start a promotion versus promotion feud, which ended in an angle at the end of the show where Coralluzzo and several of his wrestlers all attacked Rodden after a barbed wire match against Bull Payne. Tom Burton is doing a gimmick where he wrestles people out of the crowd. At least on this show the guy out of the crowd was a planted worker, and challenged Dan Severn to a match on September 4th. Stan Lane worked as a guest ring announcer for an IWA show in Kannapolis, North Carolina last week. It was announced that Ricky Steamboat would work the next area show for the promotion as the guest referee for an August match between Greg Valentine and masked superstar Bill Eadie. In a trade journal advertising personal appearances, there is a listing for Kevin Sullivan and woman, and in the ad it states by contract, they must sit 30 feet apart. United Wrestling Association in Tulare, California on August 2nd is advertising Jake Roberts, Marty Jannetty, and Leif Cassidy. Northern States Wrestling on September 26th in Westland, Michigan has Cassidy appearing. AWF on August 23rd in Haverhill, Massachusetts has King Kong Bundy, Valentine, Jimmy Snuka, Bushwhackers, Doink the Clown, Lou Albano, and the Samoans booked. Martin Maron is running shows on August 1st and August 3rd in Anaheim, California, headlined by Vampiro Canadiense. Vampiro will be working August 2nd in Bardstown, Kentucky for Ian Rodden. According to friends of Vampiro, the Michinoku firing was bogus in that Vampiro was married on May 30th and went on a honeymoon to Hawaii, and great Sasuke should have known about it. The 2-year-old grandson of Afa the Samoan, named Jack, tragically passed away on July 18th in Pensacola, Florida after falling into a swimming pool and being unable to be revived. There is apparently at least some talks going on about lucha shows with the Promo Azteca wrestlers for the weekend of August 23rd and August 24th for Chicago and Los Angeles, but it's only in the talking stages right now. NHB. No late changes in the July 27th UFC lineup. UFC has released a tentative lineup, none of which is officially signed, for its next show in October, headlined by Don Frye vs. Vitor Belfort. Although with Frye's New Japan deal it is considered an extreme long shot this match will take place, and it's more likely that either Randy Couture or Marco Ruiz would be put in that position, with Mark Coleman as another long shot, as Semaphore Entertainment Group's plan all along has been for Coleman vs. Belfort in December. The heavyweight tournament was listed as Carlos Barreto of Brazil, Couture, Oleg Toktarov and Kimo, which would be the strongest heavyweight division in a long time. The light heavyweights listed are Rico Schiaparelli, a former NCAA champion with experience in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Inson Inoue, and perhaps Valid Ismail. As of our last report, Mark Coleman actually hadn't signed the contract for the July 27th pay-per-view, so there may be last-minute financial maneuverings. On the July 27th show, the heavyweight division really isn't bad at all. Brian Johnston vs. Daniel Babish is an interesting matchup between all-round fighting skill and a large, 310-pound, powerful wrestler, former Division II national champion, who can hit hard. I've seen his rock some people, including big names like Barreto, with his fists in Brazilian shows, and Mark Kerr is generally considered among the best NHB fighters in the world and is a world-class wrestler. There is no logical reason that Moti Horenstein, 0-2 NHB record, is in this class. It's some sort of a weird political favor, and he should provide Kerr with a relatively easy first round and give him a major edge against the Johnston vs. Bobish winner, since theoretically that may be a difficult fight for whomever winds up on top. There will be a World Cage Combat Championship on September 27th in Townsville, Australia, with an 8-man tournament that will include Tom Erickson, Paul Verlins and former pro wrestler Dieselberto, plus singles matches with Australians Alex Cook, formerly Pancrase, and Chris Haseman, rings. In the wake of the Gary Goodridge victory with the groin claw, Brazilian promoter Serge Battarelli claimed that the Pedro actually tapped in that match from punches and knees, although admitted Goodridge did squeeze his balls. He added the rule to all future shows that any type of groin attacks would be barred. There will be a women's Vale Tudo tournament called L12, probably promoted by LLPW sometime this fall. The first L1 was held in 1995 and was won by 6'3", 317-pound Soviet judo woman monster Svetlana Gundarenko, beating LLPW Shinobu Kondori in the finals. ECW. It was a big weekend, as both the July 18th show in Queens, New York, and the July 19th show at the ECW Arena drew sellout crowds. The Queens show was a turnaway crowd in the 900-seat building, which was impressive in a downpour. The next night drew what most believed was the largest crowd ever packed into the ECW Arena at around 1,500 or so, with more bleacher seating added. There were reports of 4 busloads of fans turned away at the door in Philadelphia, but from what we've been told, there was actually 1 busload that came from Wildwood, New Jersey, and arrived after the building was packed, but they all managed to get in. The big news from the arena show was the heel turn of Rick Rude, joining the triple threat with Shane Douglas, Bam Bam Bigelow, and Chris Candido. The show was described as average going into the main event, and like the previous 2 shows, the angle at the end of the show got over great. It was a cage match with Jerry Lawler and Rob Van Dam and Sabu versus Tommy Dreamer and Sandman, and X-Dreamer and Sandman came out by themselves, and Lawler got on the mic and began running them down for not having a partner, and said how it proved ECW as a rip-off company for advertising a mystery partner and then not delivering on the surprise. He began joking that Beulah must be the mystery partner. Finally, Rude, who was on the stage with Joey Styles, said that he was the mystery partner, which got a huge reaction. Lawler called Rude a cripple, but he came to the ring and got into the cage, but immediately clotheslined Dreamer, rammed Beulah into the cage, and the heels destroyed Sandman and Dreamer once again with 2 chairs that Rude threw into the cage. Terry Funk came out to make the save, but he was jumped by the triple threat. They handcuffed Dreamer to the cage in crucifix style and crotched him, and Lawler used the Gary Goodridge claw to the balls. They handcuffed Sandman to the cage as well and began destroying him, while Sabu and Van Dam would knock the other wrestlers who tried to climb the cage down. Finally, Taz got in the ring, and Sabu and Van Dam, seeing that, both ran away, leaving Lawler by himself. Taz choked out Lawler, but the triple threat ended up attacking and destroying Taz. Rude left with Francine and the triple threat. Rude will second Candido and Bigelow, while Francine will continue to second Douglas, although Heyman wants Rude to work with Douglas to help him learn more heel tricks, since Douglas is being groomed once again for the top heel spot in the company. This sets up Taz and Sandman and Dreamer as a 3-man team for the August 9th show at the ECW Arena, which would most likely be against Lawler and Van Dam and Sabu, although that wasn't finalized. In the other cage match, the Gangstas won the ECW tag titles from Bubba Ray and Devon Dudley in a weapons legal cage match when Mustafa pinned Bubba, who was selling himself after giving New Jack the Bubba cutter off the cage. It was described as good for a Dudleys vs. Gangstas style match, with the highlight being New Jack doing a full body splash off the top of the high cage. After the match, the Gangstas were destroyed. They are doing a gimmick where you won't know until the last minute whether or not the Gangstas will be able to defend the titles on the pay-per-view show due to the injuries. There will definitely not be a Dudleys vs. Gangstas match on the pay-per-view, and if the Dudleys don't go into the pay-per-view as champions, they won't appear on the card, and Joel Gertner will get his head and chest hair shaved. Terry Funk kept the ECW title, beating Shane Douglas via DQ when Francine bit Funk in the right ear and Funk bladed his ear big time. Taz beat Lance Storm in a quick match to keep the TV title with a chokeout. Earlier in the show, Blue Meanie, back to that name with the dumping of the BWO gimmick after Stevie Richards left, came out wearing a Taz outfit and was trying to get Taz to like him, but Taz chased him out of the building, and they are going to do Meanie sightings on television. Candido and Bigelow beat Chris Chetty and Balls Mahoney. Mikey Whipwreck and Spike Dudley beat PG-13 and Jason in a handicap match. PG-13 wore their USWA tag titles to the ring and were announced as champions, but said they wouldn't defend the belts in a small-time organization like ECW. Axl beat Tracy Smothers in a match where Smothers juiced from a chair shot, and in the opener, John Cronus beat El Puerto Ricano, Pablo Marquez. There was a minor backstage incident after this match. After Cronus won, I believe he used the 450 Scorpio Splash, which he does even better than either Scorpio or Juventud Guerrera, and he's larger than either. The feeling was the move wasn't sold long enough. Perry Saturn, who was at ringside, cracked him with an incredibly brutal crutch shot. When he got back, Saturn confronted him about not selling either the finisher or the crutch shot long enough and pie-faced him backstage, but Puerto Ricano simply apologized for it and the situation was diffused. Saturn is already off crutches and walking with a heavy brace on his knee and is way ahead of schedule on rehabilitation, and there is actually some consideration for him returning for the November pay-per-view show. Thomas Rodman, the inchworm who was the BWO member doing a Dennis Rodman knockoff, suffered a broken eardrum when Taz slapped him hard across the face as they were blowing off his role and the angle. At one point Dan Severn was strongly considered for the mystery partner role in the six-man. There was also consideration of trying to put together a deal with WCW where they would use a WCW wrestler on the show in exchange for a lower settlement in the Raven deal, but since WCW didn't even offer any kind of settlement, that didn't take place either. The plan all along was to do this type of angle with Rude as a way to put him more into the storyline and off television, where his gimmick as the announcer who doesn't know what he isn't allowed to say on television was clearly short-term, although not necessarily at this time. The feeling on Severn is that if he's going to work here, it's to do a pay-per-view match against Taz, and the feeling is that would need a lengthy build-up to have the right heat and anticipation, and 4 weeks was way too short, so it'll probably be done sometime in the future, and they instead went with Condito as Taz pay-per-view opponent. At the Queen show, Paul Heyman got on the house mic and did a big-time fuck the WWF speech. He also announced that the first TV taping after the pay-per-view show would be in Queens on August 21st. The heat in that building was described as similar to the ECW arena in 1995 in that even the opener with Jason and Chetty got big reactions. Shane Douglas did a TV interview where he claimed he did the job, using those words, and laughed about tapping out, saying that he simply wanted to lose the TV title since he wanted the heavyweight title instead. It was really strange to hear a wrestler basically saying that he took a dive and used the term did the job to say that. They were hinting on TV of an eventual tag team with Cronus and New Jack. The TV show this week was filled with tons of swearing, audio cut, but the wording was obvious, particularly by Rude talking about how much he hated Lawler. At one point during a match with a triple threat, Joey Styles said that Balls Mahoney wants to cream Francine, and Rude responded, "So do I." Jim Cornette received a $750 payoff, a dinner at a 4-star restaurant and limo service for the night in exchange for doing the angle. Paul Heyman said it's absolutely untrue that he gave the WWF the tape of Steve Austin doing Hulk Hogan for use on the Stone Cold video that has turned into such a controversial situation. Joey Styles is still said to be planning on suing WWF over the video. Heyman said if you see the tape, it's obviously dubbed from VHS because of the quality and not dubbed from 3/4 or Super VHS as a professional dub would be. The actual figure ECW is paying for Channel 31 in New York is $3,000 per week for the 2 a.m. time slot, which is likely its biggest weekly television bill. The only new matches added to the pay-per-view show will be a singles match with Bigelow against either Mahoney or Chetty and another singles match with Van Dam. The working idea is to have Van Dam work against a non-ECW regular for his gimmick. A clarification on a story that caused a lot of controversy over the past week in regard to ECW potentially running the pay-per-view or a house show at Northern Kentucky University near Cincinnati. It was reported here last week that a local indie promoter had sent the college a tape of the Eric Kulas incident, and they started asking questions and it all fell apart. The college president received a tape of the Kulas incident and the college legal counsel began asking questions. The tape actually came from an anonymous source, but the belief locally is that it did come from a local indie promoter who didn't want ECW running in their area. Both Steve Carl and Mark LaMonaco, Bubba Ray Dudley, who was going to be the local promoter for the show at ECW, said that ECW decided itself not to hold the show there and instead went with a Fort Lauderdale, Florida site, and Carl claimed Northern Kentucky University was at no point the primary site for the pay-per-view. According to Dave D'Angelo, who works at Campus Recreation and was the local contact, he saw the Kulas tape and the legal staff was worried about potential liability and the college was worried about bad publicity in regard to doing a national pay-per-view show. ECW sent several testimonials from buildings that were happy to have ECW and proof of liability insurance to the college. From an ECW standpoint, publicity that they had a pay-per-view show scheduled for a building and if they were banned and had to move it to a new site would again put them looking to outsiders as something akin to UFC or EFC, which has had to do the same thing so many times, which is the thing they fear most. The Extreme name, A very clever marketing idea when Paul Heyman came up with it a few years back. Bit them in the ass big time because many cable companies and media outlets have lumped them in with Extreme Fighting, which has caused a red flag waved at many cable systems who have then decided not to carry the product. Since they never officially booked the pay-per-view for that building, that isn't the case here. D'Angelo's, who said he was grossed out by the tape, felt that doing just a local house show in which the university would be part of the financial split of the gate and basically be working somewhat as co-promoters would risk garnering negative national publicity, and he was pretty confident the lawyers would approve ECW in the building for a tentatively planned August 30th house show. He said ECW admitted that the Culas incident took place after the college had gotten the tape, but explained that it was a singular incident that happened several months ago and isn't indicative of their product today. There was a lot of unhappiness among several people in ECW over this getting in the Observer because Request TV, which is carrying the ball for ECW on pay-per-view, is still afraid of bad publicity for ECW, and the Culas tape is always a potential time bomb, particularly if media outlets were to cover a story and then get the tape and see it for themselves. Many in ECW are upset that the Culas incident seems to always be hung over the company's head. Carl noted that at this point Culas still hasn't filed any legal action against ECW and that ECW has attempted to get medical reports from the Culas family to find out the actual injuries suffered but has never received anything in return. In regard to Louis Spicolli, if he got upset with anyone backstage about doing the job for Tom Pritchard last week, he didn't blow up at anyone specifically, although Sabu was having to tell him to calm down about it and not to blow his job over it. Spicolli is on thin ice with the promotion, and all other things being equal, the fact he has to be flown in every week from California, and that Heyman wants him to work out in the ring at 5 p.m. before his matches every night, and he hasn't been doing so, isn't helping matters. He wasn't on this weekend's shows, but that was due to his being given the weekend off ahead of time. The rap band Insane Clown Posse, which is getting so much media pub of late after being dropped by Disney for their song called The Great Malenko. With all the media pub about that song, I've yet to hear anyone note who the song was named after. And signing with Interscope Records, was on Howard Stern on July 17th, and spent a lot of time putting over how big fans they were of ECW and talked about that they would be going to the show in Queens the next night. They said their favorite wrestler was Rob Van Dam. They put ECW over so big that Heyman thought the plug helped the crowd significantly in Queens as far as how many were turned away, and also helped Philadelphia. Stern generally hates pro wrestling but didn't say anything negative about it in the interview. WCW. There will be a Clash of Champions on August 21st from Nashville, with the top two matches being Scott Hall and Randy Savage versus The Giant and Diamond Dallas Page, and Ric Flair and Kurt Hennig versus Six and Conan. The only other matches we are aware of at press time for the August 9th pay-per-view show from Sturgis, South Dakota are Hennig versus Page, which was announced this past weekend, and Conan versus Rey Mysterio Jr. in some sort of a death match, so Mysterio Jr.'s 2 months off is going to wind up closer to 1 month. There was a plan originally to have an 8-man Lucha Libre style match, but it was dropped for this card because of the belief the biker crowd in Sturgis would ruin the match. Nitro on July 22nd in Jacksonville, Florida drew a sellout 7,465, 6,264 paying $100,979. Overall a good, but not great show. Conan beat Tsubasa, a trainee of Ultimo Dragon in Mexico who is actually a transplanted Japanese, in 27 with the Tequila Sunrise submission. Dragon won the TV title from Steven Regal via tap out with the Dragon Sleeper in 3:23. Crowd went nuts for Dragon's offense and for the surprise title switch. It was good, but it wasn't enough time to develop a match these two should be doing. Giant beat Great Muta via DQ in 51 for blowing the mist in Giant's eyes as he was about to be choke slammed. Savage and Vince joined in the fun until Giant made his own comeback. Being blinded when Luger came in for the save, Giant nearly choke slammed him but figured it out and let him down. Dean Malenko pinned Steve McMichael in 4:23 after outside interference from Jeff Jarrett. Malenko carried it to a decent match. After the match, Jarrett and Deborah McMichael asked Malenko to join their team and watch their back. Malenko acted like he'd consider the offer but said he wouldn't answer until he was good and ready. Eddie Guerrero pinned Hector Guerrero in 3:45 with a frog splash. Very good for what it was, both as a match and the telling the story in the post-match. Malenko came out and attacked Eddie and put him in the cloverleaf, but Hector saved Eddie. Then when Malenko attacked Hector, Eddie walked out on him. J.J. Dillon came out to sign Raven to a contract, but Stevie Richards said that he'd signed with WCW and acted like he negotiated the deal for Raven. Raven gave one of his interviews nobody understands and ripped up the contract. Luger beat Scott Norton via DQ in 1:54, when Vince interfered.
Luger made his own save and racked Vince after the match.
Since Luger is being groomed for Hogan in a few weeks, he really should have racked Norton as well. Mortis and Wrath beat La Parka and Psicosis in 4:33 when they used a combination powerbomb and Ace Crusher double team move from All Japan on Psicosis. Psicosis blew a rope climb spot and looked as though he killed himself, or at the very least ripped his legs and groin up, but true to form he got back up as if nothing had happened and did every spot perfectly from that point, including both Mexicans doing great dives. It was good.
After the match, Parka used another of those breakaway chairs on Mortis, but Wrath cut off Parka with a foot to the face.
Marcus Bagwell pinned Booker T in 5:42 with the Buff Blockbuster after outside interference from Norton in what was the best match on either big show.
Both of these guys are really underrated, probably because both are in tag teams with partners who aren't that good.
They did an angle where Mysterio Jr. came out on crutches and Conan came out and kicked away both crutches.
As Conan went after him, Parka, Psicosis, and both Villanos backed him up. Earlier in the show they set the stage for this by saying how Conan got all the Mexicans into WCW but they don't know how to react to him because of what he did to Mysterio Jr. and him joining the NWO. Mike Tenay pointed out that some of the guys who backed him up are usually his rivals. Kurt Hennig pinned Michael Wallstreet in 48 with the Fisherman Suplex. Too short to get a read on Hennig. After the match, Page attacked Hennig and as Hennig went for his finisher, Page turned it into a diamond cutter and left him laying. Under normal circumstances I'd say this was stupid because what's the point of seeing a revenge match on pay-per-view when the face has already left the heel laying? But my feeling is Page is going to put Hennig over big time on the pay-per-view by having Page reverse the diamond cutter into a pinning combination. Finally, Hall and Nash retained the WCW tag titles, beating Flair and Benoit in 8:21 when Nash pinned Benoit after a foot to the face. This was a good match as well. Six interfered attacking Flair and wound up putting him in the buzzkiller after Flair had his shoulder run into the post while the camera was in the ring, until McMichael made the save. Earlier in the show Flair was going to announce the fourth horseman, but instead Six came out, which led to the main event challenge. Later in the show Flair was shown backstage talking to Hennig and making it clear Flair expected Hennig to come out and Hennig acted like he'd listened to Flair's offer but hadn't decided to accept it yet. Flair and Hennig are teaming up at the Clash, but the eventual idea is to wind up with Malenko as the fourth horseman. It's a virtual certainty Harlem Heat will be repackaged with Jacqueline as their manager. WCW Saturday Night for July 26th and August 2nd was taped on July 15th in Fort Myers, Florida before 3,623 paying $52,890. We don't have a lot of details but do know Conan broke the leg of Jerry Lynn, who was making his final appearance. They did a match with the Outsiders against Public Enemy, but it was the Steiners that showed up in the PE outfit carrying a table. Eddie Guerrero beat Hector Guerrero with a frog splash and they started setting up the Giant vs. Savage match for the pay-per-view. Halloween Havoc will be October 26th in Las Vegas with a tentative card of Hogan vs. Piper, Giant vs. Nash and Page vs. Savage. WCW will be meeting sometime this week with George Steinbrenner with the idea of doing a Nitro taping from Yankee Stadium. Hogan is currently working on a movie in Montreal through early August. Major shows for November are Nitros on November 3rd in Philadelphia, November 10th in Fort Myers, Florida, November 27th in Cincinnati and November 24th in Saginaw, Michigan, while the World War III pay-per-view will be November 23rd at the Palace in Auburn Hills, Michigan. The October 27th Nitro has been moved from San Bernardino, California to Cox Arena in San Diego. Hogan is going to work house shows on September 6th in Indianapolis and September 7th in Chicago, teaming with Nash against Luger and Giant. Also on those shows will be Savage vs. Page, Steiners vs. Hall and Six, Malenko vs. Jarrett, Jericho vs. Dragon, Conan vs. Mysterio Jr. and Benoit vs. Regal plus Flair and more. On Saturday night, David Taylor appeared to start a renewed push using a double-arm suplex into a front cradle as his new finisher. Lenny Lane looked a little green but very athletic and promising in his bout with Six. Juventud Guerrera became the first wrestler in the US to do the move known in Japan as the reverse Franken Toyota, which is a reverse version of a Frankensteiner off the top rope. WCW recently paid $100,000 to the estate of Jimi Hendrix for Hogan and Dennis Rodman to use Voodoo Child as their ring entrance music for the next 12 months. Rodman was photographed in several Japanese non-wrestling magazines backstage at the pay-per-view talking with Dory Funk. Most of the crew was in Orlando, Florida this week for worldwide tapings at Universal Studios. They did no angles the entire week, but had more big names in town working television matches, including Hennig, who was said to have looked sluggish, Flair, Nash, Hall, Giant, Luger, Savage, Muta, Chono and basically everyone not named Hogan or Piper. Among those who debuted were Danny from Mexico, Norman Smiley, Texas Hangman, largely as jobbers,
while Lenny Lane and Greg Valentine were at the tapings. Bobby Eaton and Joey Maggs worked as a tag team.
Ultimo Dragon brought in 4 of his students from Mexico to work as jobbers for the Mexicans, one of whom was Tsubasa, and they were said to have all been pretty green. This week will be mainly tapings for the Pro. Dandy and Villano 5 have signed contracts with WCW.
There's talk of giving a major push to High Voltage. Steiners are scheduled to win the tag titles, but now more than ever, nothing happens until it happens. WWF. July 21st, Raw from Halifax, Nova Scotia drew a sellout 8,544, paying $159,375, which in US dollars is $116,344, or barely beating the all-time live Raw record gate of $116,178 set July 14th in San Antonio, although those marks will easily be broken for the July 28th Raw from Pittsburgh.
I believe the show sold out a few days ahead of time, and like previous recent crowds in Canada, the heat was incredible. For Canada, this Hart Foundation as the anti-American babyfaces angle continues to do incredible business.
The show had some good, some bad, and some strange and indifferent. It opened with Vader over Ken Shamrock in 7:02 via countout when Davey Boy Smith interfered and powerslammed Shamrock on the ramp, and he couldn't beat the count. It wasn't anywhere close to the level of their pay-per-view match in May, but it was still a solid match. Brachus, former Mr. Olympia bodybuilding contender Achim Albrecht of Germany, did an interview on tape, so I guess we'll be seeing him soon. He's been training in Canada with Bret Hart and Leo Burke and worked on and off for a few months in Memphis after debuting on some small shows and TV tapings in dark matches late last year. Hart Foundation did an interview to the expected huge pop with loud US sucks chants and challenged Undertaker and Steve Austin and Shamrock to a flag match later in the show. I'm not sure why they mentioned Shamrock's name, because him not accepting after already losing earlier in the show made him appear weak. Austin came out and accepted for himself. They announced Bariquas and DOA were suspended for 1 week. Apparently the round-trip airfare to Halifax from anywhere was huge, and they mainly used wrestlers that were already on the road tour and didn't fly in the extras and full crew as is normally the case as a cost-saving measure, and this show had tons of taped features which apparently with no opposition head-to-head. The feeling was they could get away with better. Brian Christopher beat Brian Walsh in 3:53 with a leg drop off the top. Decent. They aired a tape of the Commandant and the Truth Commission and said they'd debut on Raw next week. After seeing them in Memphis, I can hardly wait. That was facetious.
Godwins won a triple threat match over Blackjacks and Headbangers in 5:24 to get a title shot at Austin and Dude Love next week in Pittsburgh. They've changed the rules, so now in these matches there are 3 men in the ring at all times and you can only tag your partner. The old lame rules they stole from WCW made it so partners could tag anyone and one partner could actually lay down for the other and allow their team to win the match. This was off the page horrible. Phineas pinned Windham after Henry hit him with the bucket. Shawn Michaels came out to a heel response the likes of which would have made the Sheik in his heyday proud. Michaels did a backflip off the top rope landing on his feet, with his knee not even wrapped, I guess as an inside rib to show his buddies that his knee is fine and he's just screwing with everyone. He gave the Wolfpack sign on the air and seemed out of it, and his voice was so far gone that he sounded like Brian Pillman. The crowd chanted "F*** him." He announced he'd referee the Undertaker vs. Bret match at SummerSlam, but was told if he showed any partiality to Undertaker that he'd never be allowed to wrestle in the US again. He also accepted a spot in the TV main event. Hunter Hearst Helmsley then wrestled the Patriot. Because Patriot came out with the American flag, he was booed out of the building and Helmsley became the big babyface. Owen, Bret and Bulldog came out and Bret slapped Vince McMahon over, swerving him by naming Michaels as ref. McMahon and Bret went at it with McMahon pulling Bret's t-shirt over his face. At the same time, everyone destroyed Patriot. When they came back from the break and showed a close-up on camera of a shaken-up McMahon, the crowd booed the hell out of McMahon as well. Goldust beat Farouk in 3:27 via DQ when Kama interfered in a terrible match with an even worse finish. This match served as a backdrop as McMahon left the announcing position and went backstage where Michaels was holding his knee with the idea that the Hart Foundation had jumped him doing a spoof on the deal from Hartford. The work knee injury gives him a few more weeks off. Michaels was swearing at McMahon on TV, not all of which was edited out, again trying to do an angle out their deal behind the scenes in Hartford. TV main saw Bret and Owen and Smith over Undertaker and Austin and Dude Love in a flag on a pole match in 1827. Match had great heat, but the work was disappointing given who was in the match. Actually, almost the entire match consisted of Owen doing a babyface sell job, but the babyface/heels he worked against were all screwed up due to crowd reactions, Undertaker at this point, due to style and dude love, due to gimmick, really don't work in an environment where they are heels.
It was a mistake to put Dude Love in this situation so soon because he not only was totally flat, making the role look like a one-hit wonder, but also he was teaming with Undertaker with no storyline reason or even acknowledgement after such a bitter feud. Finish saw Brian Pillman come from under the ring and knock down Undertaker as he tried to climb the pole to get the American flag, so on the opposite side of the ring Bret grabbed the Canadian flag to win. The match also featured one of the biggest televised exposes of the year. Obviously they had gotten clearance from USA to go 10 minutes long, and Jim Ross announced that they would stay with the main event until a conclusion, all night if they had to. However, USA ran a crawl saying that Nikita would start in 10 minutes, and then 5 minutes later ran a second crawl about starting in 5 minutes.
And right on time they went to the finish and got out of there.
Pablo Marquez, El Puerto Ricano, was called about working on Raw over the next week or two against Taka Michinoku. Devon Storm and Ace Darling were also called about working the August 4th Raw in light heavyweight matches.
The actual situation last week with Sid was that he is believed to have suffered an anxiety attack at the tapings.
Sid told friends that he thought he was having a heart attack. He wasn't taken to the hospital, although WWF officials wanted to take him to the hospital, but he refused to go and instead went back to his hotel room, and they had downtown Bruno stay with him to make sure everything was okay. Sid has lost a ton of weight since he hasn't been able to train due to the back injury, and also from the flu has had no appetite. He was to get another MRI this week with problems with both a pinched nerve in his neck and the bad back, which sometimes causes one of his legs to go numb.
Doug Furness was told by his doctor that his broken back would require surgery that would put him out of action at least 6 months, but he's decided against surgery and would instead try and rehab it the best he could.
He's shooting for a return probably around mid-September. WWF is looking at producing a major card in the United Kingdom in September. Weekend house shows saw July 18th in Worcester, Massachusetts draw $4,596 and $78,611, July 19th in St. John's, Newfoundland drew $3,636 and $79,248, and July 20th in Sydney, Nova Scotia drew $3,654 and $78,903. Weekend merchandise was $131,000. The SummerSlam advance for the Continental Arena on August 3rd is 14,621 tickets sold, and with comps it is very close to capacity right now, and $451,427. This makes it the second largest gross for an arena event, trailing only the $837,150 for WrestleMania in Chicago. Within North America this year,
WWF has a 1-hour prime time slot on the Star Plus channel in Hong Kong, which is now being broadcast via satellite in Japan.
So the WWF now has all its television shows into the Japan market, and the company itself probably won't even know it until they read it here, as WWF previously had no television in Japan.
Raw is split into 1-hour shows on Monday and Tuesday, Live Wires on Wednesday, Shotgun is on Thursday, Superstars on Friday. Raw is also repeated both mid-afternoons and late nights on Saturday and Sunday.
All the shows air with Japanese subtitles. WCW airs only worldwide and pro on Samurai TV and JARA, another cable sports channel, respectively. There's a locker room joke that the guys rib Ron Simmons with. They bend over and ask Simmons to kick them in the kidney so they can put on 30 pounds of muscle like Ahmed Johnson did after he had his kidney injured.
Several of the WWF's biggest names were on a Wrestle Vessel cruise during the past week, including Austin, the Hart family, Michaels, and others.
Over the weekend, Live Wire did a 1.3 rating and Superstars did a 1.4 rating. The working idea is apparently to not introduce the Kane character until the September pay-per-view show. While not confirmed, rumor has it that Victor Quiñones has signed Hysteria away from AAA, along with getting back Minnie's Mascarada Sagrada Jr., who had been working for Promo Azteca as Mini Rey Mysterio Jr., and Espectrito, who was here before as Mini Vader, along with several of the other top minis like the original Mascarada Sagrada and Octagon Cheeto. Not sure if it's for WWF consumption, but his job was to sign up good young Mexican talent. Mini Rey and Espectrito were scheduled to debut on the July 28th Nitro from Charleston, West Virginia, but both were unhappy since they jumped from AAA to Azteca with a promise from Khan and they'd be getting a WCW contract, but then Eric Bischoff didn't want to use minis. Finally, they were to get a look-see on Nitro, hopefully under better conditions than the last time where they had a minis tag and gave them 2 minutes to do nothing, but that fell apart. The Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228.
July 28, 1997.